Hi, everybody. Michael Hanrahan here. I'm a documentary film producer and educator of environmental media, and I've also been known to buy and sell yachts. So very excited to be here with my good friend, Mark.
Michael, we've known each other for many, many years. You worked with Mike Degree, who was a big part of TEDx Santa Barbara in the early years before he passed away suddenly. He was just a dear mentor to a lot of different people. And I know you worked on a lot of projects since that time. Tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you do so that I know you really well, but maybe help the audience understand the kind of work you do out in the field.
Yeah, sure. So, Mark, I started my career in filmmaking at the University of Miami in South Florida, studying the ocean, studying marine biology, and kind of recognized quickly that I might not be the best scientist. I recognized that I really wanted to be in the field, and being in the marine environment felt, very important to me, having grown up in the ocean. And so I asked around it at the University of Miami what else I might be able to do with a science background, but more spending time in the field. And I had a mentor back then, a fellow named Kenny Broad, who said, documentary film is pretty great. And at the time, Discovery Channel was just launching. This was 1988, 1989. And so from there, I really centered on the ocean. I started as a captain. I worked as a captain on board boats in Miami, and slowly began to build up some equipment that I used, some film equipment, and began to be hired for doing underwater camera work, which I loved. The first time I was underwater with a Bolex film camera underwater with about 12 minutes of film to roll. And I was filming. The most interesting thing that I came across underwater on that first dive was a sea turtle. And when we processed the film, and I had the turtle's feet in the shot, but nothing else. So I realized that I needed to do a little work with framing. But I would go on to assist in several natural history documentaries. One on gray whales, the gray whale migration, beautiful series in Thailand. And then eventually finding my way towards Mike Degree. And really, Mike taught me so much. He's taught us all so much. But in film, there was no one who had been able to light underwater in the way that Mike did. Mike recognized that most filmmakers underwater were front lighting. They had big, powerful lights sitting on top of the housing of their cameras. So all the fish, all the marine life were lit from the front. And what Mike began to do, what he recognized, he sought depth. He wanted to see depth in his lighting. So he would hang lights over the top of his subjects, or from the side, as well as from the front, providing more depth for the creatures that he was looking to capture. So just an incredible person and fantastic cinematographer. And just to carry on, these days, Mark, I largely work with scientists in an effort to better communicate the challenges of the natural world. The scientists often are not always great communicators. And so I believe that they need people like me who can help to be the bridge between their great data and scientific information and me, someone who's more in tune maybe with what the public would find interesting and compelling, and encourage them to action.
But there was a lot to unpack there. I think the thing that's interesting, because I also was interesting, we have a little parallel with my software company. We did data visualization, and we would have scientists come to Santa Barbara with their data about, I'm thinking one of ocean climbs and thermoclimbs in the Gulf of Mexico. And all he'd ever seen was the numbers, and we turned it into pictures. And he's like, he literally jumped up out of his chair. He goes, that's what I knew was there. And it's until you can make a picture of something, do you actually have the ability to add emotion to to the subject. So you're bringing the data to life. So I love that you've paired up with scientists as a storyteller to be able to do that. And help me understand, how soon did you figure out that the resulting film actually became a tool for activism?
You know, immediately at the University of Miami, there was a very important campaign that was emerging at the time around tuna fish. You might recall that dolphin safe tuna for a while back in the late 80s, early 90s. There was a lot of concern about dolphins being slaughtered inadvertently while harvesting tuna, largely for, you know, star-kissed, the tunas that we get in the supermarket. And it's because of this one guy, Sam Labuddy. He was very upset when he heard that dolphins were being captured in nets for tuna. He found his way aboard one of these boats as a chef and snuck a tiny camera on board and captured clandestinely the most devastating imagery of dolphins coming over the big blocks and being, you know, basically clubbed to death on deck and then pushed off the boat. And almost single-handedly, that person, Sam, and his film changed the industry and forced tuna ships to be more aware, more responsible when setting around dolphins. So that was probably the very first time. And I tell that story to my students because there's nothing quite like recognizing that something that you did could have such an instrumental change. I'm still waiting for one of my films to have quite that impact, but there's still time.
One of the things that has attracted me to TED and then to TEDx is that a single talk can change the world. And we've seen this over and over and over again, where, I mean, heck, in Santa Barbara, 35 million views of the 100 talks we've done. Do we think lives have been changed as a result? 100%. 100%. So I get that drive as soon as you saw. It's like, man, I want to do that. And then I'm guessing you learned so much by all the collaboration, because everything you do is a collaboration, right? Just by definition, it's a collaboration. I want to go to the title of this talk, though. You say navigating the end of the world as we know it. That I tend to not lean towards dystopian futures, but help me understand why we should be concerned right now.
Yeah, and it is a bit of a dramatic title. I'm known back in my early years as a filmmaker. I would cut films with the intent of making my audience cry.
Oh,
I was seeking that kind of emotional response. And I quickly learned, it didn't take long, that is not the path to encouraging others to make a change. Effectively, it just makes them upset and turn off. So when basically I'm recognizing that we face so much in this moment, incredible political polarization in this country and climate catastrophes that we're seeing across the news almost on a daily basis. I mean, the terrible situation that's going on in Jackson, Mississippi right now, with an inability of that city to have drinking water or any kind of water.
Any kind of water. Yeah.
Just the dramatic economic destabilization that we're seeing across the globe. So navigating the end of the world, I don't sincerely believe that, you know, we're at the end of the world for in any real sense, but in parentheses, as we know it, it does feel that there is a significant shift going on, certainly in the way of something as significant as climate change, from my perspective, it's actually a beautiful moment in that we're talking about it. And Al Gore, couldn't be happier with his inconvenient truth. We're kind of starting to fess up to the fact that we are facing an inconvenient truth. And it's imperative that every one of us on an individual basis really takes a look at our lives to determine, are there ways that we can reduce our impact, minimize the footprint that we have on the planet? And I've taken that step. 4 years ago, I sold my car and have been riding my bike, taking the bus or walking or Ubering, ever since. I like a lot of times for my work, I have to fly, I have to travel. And so that's a tremendous carbon impact from, the fossil fuels that are burnt as a result of flying. And so I felt that it was important for me to do something in my life that made another dramatic reduction of my fossil fuels. So that for me was driving, or owning a car. And so I think that, while we are faced with stories all the time of what's happening, Pakistan, a third of the country is underwater right now, certainly drought on the entire West Coast. We're all very aware what's going on. And frankly, it can be a bit intimidating or overwhelming, such that we're not sure what to do. And I think that from my perspective, if there's anything that I would communicate in this talk, it's that let's not be silent about this issue any longer. Let's talk about it amongst ourselves. Ask friends that you have that might know a bit more about the topic than you, and ask for ways that you can actually make a difference, because it really is imperative that we all make this big change. I was happy to see that the government decided, has passed law that California will no longer have fossil fuel cars made after 2035. I think it was 2035.
Yeah,
that's fantastic. That's great news.
You had mentioned that, in part of as a filmmaker and as a storyteller is calling attention to the little things. So you're reading and paying attention, and you've got a network of stuff, and I'm going to guess, like me, you're saying, where is the story in that, other than just being a reporter? How do I approach this as a storyteller? You were mentioning that there was a spill or barrels of DDT found just in the Channel Islands, out at Catalina Island. For our listener, the Channel Islands are right off the coast of Santa Barbara, and Catalina's right off of Los Angeles. Where's, other than the reportage of that, it sounds terrible, what's the story, do you think?
That is a good question. The story, the facts are barrels of DDT have been discovered in over 1,000 feet of water just off of Catalina Island by a scientist at UCSB named Dr. Dave Valentine. And they are filled with DDT, or we think that they're filled with DDT at this point. They could be filled with other hazardous materials. The story, I think in this case, the story is the impact that our history can have a long comet's tail, in that there was a company in Los Angeles, in greater Los Angeles, called the Montrose Chemical Company, and they've gone bankrupt. They've already been cited for damaging the Southern California Bight by pumping through a pipe into the offshore waters off of Palos Verdes, tons and tons of DDT. That DDT went on to impact the animals that live in the Santa Barbara Channel. The bald eagle went locally extinct. Brown pelicans struggled for years because the DDT impacted their shells, the shells of these birds. They became soft. So I think that although these barrels, sort of they bring in this new clandestine, like who is dumping these barrels is one question. There's an intrigue. But it's also, you know, there used to be the phrase, the solution to pollution is dilution. And clearly that was never a good idea. And something, a chemical like DDT that doesn't have dramatic impacts in humans, there appears to be a safe limit of DDT for humans, but in the natural world, in the marine environment, we witnessed several birds impacted. But my question is, I wonder what's going on with animals like bottlenose dolphin that feed in the shallow, in the sand. They echolocate to find fish living in the sand, and they'll use their rostrum to dig up an eel or a small fish, and they'll consume that animal that has basically been living a few inches off of the substrate and probably ingesting DDT. So concentrating in these large mammals, again, the long tail of decisions that we make, I think that would be one storyline that I would pursue for that story.
It's interesting because the thing that comes to mind is no good deed goes unpunished. I mean, you think you're doing a good deed, and we're even going to have a talk in a couple of weeks around, you know, kind of the flip side of electrification. And we want to have, you know, what about all the lithium? What about all the copper mining? What about, I mean, so there's a lot to it. And you being able to shine your camera on it, much like the story of a clandestine camera on the dolphins, calls awareness to something. So one film is like, hold it, because I immediately started thinking of nuclear waste. And, you know, we pay a lot of attention to that, but we probably pay less attention to chemical waste. It's like, oh yeah, okay, we have, you know, yeah, right, whatever, it's in the water, who cares? Thankfully, we're a lot more aware than we were before. Michael, thank you so much for helping us understand some of these things and for shining your light on these problems.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. It's my passion. You know, I truly love capturing the beautiful imagery and communicating that in a story that just helps people to better understand the natural world and the science that governs it.